You're listening to the Valley Current.
Hey, welcome in, JoEllen. It's really good to have you on the Valley Current. You've got a really nice office, and it's so neat and organized.
Thank you very much.
Seriously, it looks like you've got a lot of space as well.
I have to admit, I love my office, but I tried to put you at the best possible angle, so I was a little strategic here, but yeah, I do love it.
No, it's great. It's great. And you know, you're one of the best dressed people that we've ever had on the show. I have to say, I'm lucky today because it's like you're at bookends, because I had a CEO of a company who I'm going to introduce you to in a future podcast. Mm-hmm. And he was well dressed, suit and tie. And now I have you, sort of a coach to CEOs on the same afternoon. So it's like such a marvel of just coincidence. I didn't plan it this way, but it turned out this way. And I have with me, but she doesn't want to be on the camera, Dr. Lee Suter. Oh, maybe she does.
Hi, JoEllen. It's so nice to see you again.
She's here listening in because you two are gonna do like some in-depth version of what I'm just going to scratch the surface on. Because I think this area of CEO coaching and consulting and the future of management science and really management advances is an untapped area, and you've become an expert in it. I want to talk about your journey because I'm sure in kindergarten you weren't thinking that this is what you were going to do with your life, right?
Correct.
I mean, when you were in school, I'll just give you a kicker because I tell the story. When I was in school, I went to a very strict Catholic grade school, and everyone in that school, including me, thought we would become medical doctors. That was the big thing back in the 1950s. You're going to be a medical doctor. Everyone's got to be a medical doctor. And there were a few of us, there were a few people in my class who were like, I'm not going to be a medical doctor. I don't like blood. I'm going to become a lawyer. And there were a lot of people like, lawyer? Who wants to be a lawyer? And I didn't think I would ever be a lawyer. I didn't think I would eventually land where I landed. It's a long story how I got there. But I'm curious about your story, which is, what did you think you wanted to be when you grew up? And how did you get to the place you are now? Because you run your own coaching firm called SAGE, S-A-G-E, Coaching and Consulting. So tell us the journey and how you got there.
Okay, well, it's a long journey, so I'll try to give I'll streamline, and then you can tell me what
Sure, of course,
speaks most to your audience. But when I was a kid, I don't really remember what I wanted to do, to be honest. But at a very early age, at least when I was probably around somewhere between the ages of 10 and 12, I did want to be a businesswoman. And that really just came from probably marketing at its finest, but seeing other women in the business world, and they became role models when you started to see their confidence, their ability to create influence, and the way they showed up. And so that had a huge impact on me. And just from a visual perspective, not necessarily understanding what it meant, but visually seeing that that's how I wanted to land, and that's what I aspired to be. So I did start that visual goal anyhow at a very early age, and then it started to evolve into what it looked like. And so in my school years, I wanted to be an accountant.
Really?
I
would never have guessed that. I would have guessed something completely different.
Yeah, I didn't really understand it. I just had a love for numbers. I thought they were fun. I liked kind of the strategy of it and putting them together. And but then I was told by a lot of people that I'm a people person, and that probably didn't match well with me. I might have a hard time with the lack of engagement. And I grew up in the DC area, so I then naturally decided I wanted to be a lawyer because that's what everybody else did. So why not?
In DC, right? In DC, right.
Exactly. What else do you do if you're there? And as my career evolved and I continued to do more things, the bottom line is I got introduced to the world of consulting and coaching, and I learned that I could bring a lot of the things that I love from a strategic perspective, from a business perspective, and then my love for people and that engagement and that development, and sort of consolidate it into something that made sense for me. And so it took a little while. I spent 16 years of my career in DC not not learning and building, creating the building blocks. But I've been now doing what I'm doing now for a little over a decade, and I'm very thankful that I found it and I got into it.
And you're happy you found your passion clearly, right?
I did. And that's, I guess, what I like my career for two reasons. The first one is that I do get to do that. But the second thing is I actually get to help other people do that too. So I constantly have this sort of pay it forward aspect of my career, which is a nice feeling.
So when you were sort of getting through college, did you sort of lean in some direction? Because sometimes I ask this question a different way, which is parents and grandparents, typically more parents than grandparents these days, have a big influence. And my parents were working class people in Brooklyn, New York, running a store, and they believed in the value of hard work and long hours. And I remember doing all that hard work and long hours and saying, there's got to be a smarter way. I swear I would say this. And my father would say, there is no smarter way. This is the way it is. Just get used to it. I remember when I finally decided to leave New York, I said, Dad, I'm going to California for one of two or three reasons. Of course, he disbelieved all three. Number one, I've got admitted into law school, a good law school, UCLA, at the right time. And I really think it'll be an interesting journey and an interesting 3 years in law school. Don't worry, you don't have to pay a dime. He was glad hearing that. I'd gotten a scholarship. And number two, if that fails, I'm going to start a software company in California because there's a place in California called Silicon Valley that's starting to emerge. He was like, software? We had the old-fashioned cash register with like the crank. I think by then he had changed it to the electric model. And then I said, number three, I'm going to be a surfer on the beach. And he just laughed at me. I said, I want to learn how to surf and I want to be on the beach. And to this day, I've been involved in a lot of software companies. I've been involved in a lot of lawsuits and a lot of law. But man, I have to start learning how to surf because that was one of the original three reasons I went to California. And he said, what's wrong with the beaches here? I said, they're too cold. He said, they're going to be cold there as well. I said, no, they're not. And sure enough, he was like partially right on that point. But he laughed. He said, you'll be back. Everyone comes back to New York. And of course, I visit. But so my dad had an influence in an oddball sort of oppositional way. Like I was going to prove he was wrong. And he said, you'll be back. So I'm curious, did your parents have some influence in that way, or your grandparents, or any role model that you can think of?
Yeah, quite frankly, I mean, I would say my story in many ways relates a little bit to yours because I too grew up in a working class family that you just worked really hard. And it's funny, I kind of had a similar situation where, I was putting myself through school and I was, working in DC, and it was a really hard thing because, it's like many cities, it's the cost of living is hard. So trying to maintain both of them was very difficult. And, I was young, I was in my very early 20s and still had not finished my degree. And one of my close friends, who was also a client at the time, was an attorney, and she kind of said the same thing. She said, gosh, there's an easier way for you to do this. Like, quit spinning your wheels. Like, go finish your degree and change your career path. She's like, do what you want to do. And so anyway, that's a whole other story of its own. But I kind of did the same thing. I just said, you know what, I'm done. And I had to take a risk and put myself out there and really make a drastic change and hope that it would pay off. And as I say, usually the greater the risk, the greater the reward. And I found that to be true. So
did you think of it as when you finally decided to leave DC, is that what attaches to the decision to shift out of your previous career and into your current career, or was it a different transition?
No, that was exactly it. I mean, I knew that in order for me to change the trajectory of my life, I had to do things drastically different. And so, I again, trying to find the consolidated version, I left DC and went to Ohio. And I lived in Ohio. It was drastically different because when I say Ohio, I wasn't living in the middle of Columbus. I was living in an Amish community about an hour and a half outside of any any major shopping area. So it was a very different life for me.
Talk about hard workers. There they are right there, right?
Oh boy, you can't even imagine. I would constantly say, why do you do it this way? They're like, because that's how we're supposed to do it. It's like, okay, I got it. So it's really fascinating. But, a lot of things happened for me when I went to Ohio. I went to sort of redirect and not fully knowing where it would be, but knowing that I was changing my career. And I met my husband right away. We started a family. And the biggest thing for my career is I was introduced to the world of coaching and consulting in a more focused capacity. I knew I wanted to do it, but it was very big. And so I met some people in the industry who taught me how to kind of crystallize what I was passionate about and gave me a lot of great opportunities. The other thing was I got the opportunity to go to grad school at Case Western. And it was just really one of in the top 5 experiences of my life. And it really taught me, a lot of, I think a lot of people, I have a lot of friends and family members who go through their academics and it doesn't always fully apply to what they get to do in the future.
Right.
And the thing that I've been really grateful for is everything from my undergrad, my grad school, my current doctorate, and my certifications, everything has really taught me how to do what I want to do. Nothing's been generic. It's all been so applicable, from broad learning to methodologies. I've used it all. And so Ohio was a great experience, but then I realized we had to shift again. So we are about 5 years ago, we went to a whole other different culture, and now we live in Houston, Texas. And so, yeah, each one's been drastically different.
But you probably have a lot more space in Houston, and you probably have a different cost of living there than you did in Ohio. Maybe it's similar, I don't know, but it's probably a lot less than DC, right?
Yeah, well, it depends on where you're at. I find in Ohio we were in a rural area, so we had a lot of space at that point. But the opportunities for work were limited, so I definitely had to travel out in order to really get my client base. Now that I'm here in Texas, I feel like you get more for the dollar. So there's still certainly a significant cost of living here, but I feel like it goes a long way. And so, we live actually in the Woodlands, and it's beautiful. It's fantastic. I love, I got two industries that I work in quite a bit here is the energy sector. I do a lot in oil and gas, and
right.
I do a lot in healthcare. And I love it. I mean, I just love oil and gas, especially, was a whole new world introduced to me. So when I got here, which is kind of a funny story, I got here in August of 2014. And that's right when oil and gas had tanked and we were entering a new recession, and everybody was asking me, are you nervous? Are you freaking out? You just got here. And I was like, no, because I don't really get it. What's happening? And they were like, maybe you don't want to know. But we got through it, and, here we are again, and in some tough times. And so, do
you think this is the inevitable trajectory for consulting and coaching, which is you become very specific to a particular industry? That is, for example, if you think about people out here that do your kind of work, it's very focused on either software or hardware or semiconductors. And yes, there is a lot of background knowledge, but it's the same high level principles of how do you influence, how do you lead, how do you coach, how do you get people to see what they're good at, how do you get people to delegate, and all that jazz that we'll talk about in a minute. I'm sure you'll get into more deeply with Lee about in a future cast. But I'm just curious, you went oil and gas on something that doesn't mix in my mind with oil and gas, which is healthcare. That at least seems like two very different extremes to me, right?
Yeah. It's a really good question. And when I'm being interviewed, I get asked that question a lot, especially in the financial market. They tend to ask me a lot, what experience do you have? And there are some industries that sort of like that focus look. But the answer is no. that you do not need to, you need to be educated within the industries and the various sectors that you're working on.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be an expert in them, and you don't need to be isolated, because so much of what we do is transferable. And I can tell you whether the language is different, and that's always takes a little while to catch on and to learn. You know, I mean, the political infrastructures are very different, and as I said, the languages. But at the end of the day, we are talking about the same things. And so everything from your leadership assessment and development, so that people know how to become or transition, I should say, from being an industry expert into, you know, in the healthcare, it could be, you know, you were a surgeon for, you know, 1 or 2 decades of your life, and you made a decision to transfer into being the chairman of a department. So now that you can have a greater impact in your industry and in the science in which you deliver. And so, you know, it looks, in the corporate world, it looks the exact same. You're an industry expert in whatever it is you do. And at some point you decide to grow the career level, and it looks very different being a VP or C-suite leader. And of course, being a CEO has its own challenges. So it's the language is the same. Much of what you're trying to do is the same. The services I deliver are going to be consistent in meeting a business need across the board. You just have to make sure, for somebody like me, that we work really hard in not just feeling like it's a one size fits all. We still need to understand what is very indicative not only of your industry, but of your culture, of your business, and then apply it appropriately.
Right. So let's now bring this to an illustration, because I am become a junkie, and Lee has to some degree, but I think a lesser degree, she'll correct me if I'm wrong, of this series called Billions.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Billions is a financial industry sort of series. I think it's in its 5th season, maybe 6th. I can't even keep track. I think I've seen some shows twice, maybe a few 3 times. But there is a coach that works inside a hedge fund with a bunch of wackos. I mean, I have to say that these people are wacky and crazy. I've seen a lot of hedge fund guys. And I have to say, I've never seen these characters. You got Bobby Axelrod, who's like a cowboy, but somehow he really knows math and statistics and calculus, and you just can't believe that part. And he has this woman, I want to say her name is Ruby Rhodes, played by Maggie Siff, S-I-F-F. She's doing a great job, because I think that's what coaches do. She's the most believable character. She's like, what's going on inside your head? What are you doing that's getting in the way of your trading the security that you're trading so badly? Because some of these people hit a roadblock and they get like a mental block, and it all devolves. And a lot of them, like, they made billions of dollars for this hedge fund guy, and now they're making nothing and they're losing a lot of money. And of course, some of them are criminals using inside information. I won't give away the show. But do you watch shows like that and just crack up? Or I'm just curious.
It's just funny that you brought this up. So the answer is no, I don't watch TV. And so I've never seen it.
Oh, you got to see it. Episode. You must.
I know. So it just makes me crack up, because I cannot tell you how many people in the last year, whatever her name is, the lead, let's say.
Wendy Rhodes. Wendy Rhodes is played by Maggie Siff, S-I-F-F.
Wendy. Oh, Wendy. So Wendy is the character's name.
Wendy Rhodes.
Wendy. Okay. So I'll be in a business setting of some sort, and be talking and explaining sort of what I do. And I've had so many people be like, "Oh my God, you're Wendy." And I'm like, I don't know who Wendy is, and
I disclaim that.
So anyway, I do need to watch it.
You need to watch it. Let me tell you why you need to watch it. I'm going to tell a little story here, because we're running out of time, but I want to tell this story. So I have the privilege, and I'm sure you do too, of, you know, traveling all over the United States to help clients throughout the United States. And, you know, you get, you know, people think it's luxurious jumping on a flight at 11 o'clock to get to Chicago at 6 a.m. It isn't. And it's not for me anymore. I do it, but I really don't look forward to it. As a kid, you know, as a younger lawyer, I looked forward to it. I used to have an actual bag in the trunk of my car. So when he got the call, the judge is holding a hearing tomorrow morning in Chicago. You got to be there by 9. I'd be able to just drive to the airport, not pack. I had the bag. I was ready to go. I can tell you lots of stories about that. But back in those days, I used to watch a program called The Love Connection.
Oh, no, I saw that. Yes.
Okay. And I swear, this is a good story, and I'll make it really brief. So
Stay tuned for part 2 of this episode of The Valley Current.